I was walking my dog when a random woman decided that he seemed happier with her. First, she tried to convince him to go with her. Then she tried to take the collar from my hand. In the end, she left far less confident than she arrived. I've always heard of clueless people, but nothing prepared me for what happened that day. I just wanted to go for a walk with my dog, but I ended up having to deal with the most insufferable person I've ever met. It was a quiet afternoon. I took the leash, called my dog, a caramel mongrel called Max, and went for a walk around the neighborhood. Max had always been a sociable dog, the kind who wags his tail at anyone and thinks everyone is his friend. This was usually a good thing, but that day it almost became a problem. We were walking quietly when we passed a square. Max, as usual, started sniffing around, happy as ever. That's when a woman, who until then had been sitting on a bench looking at her cell phone, looked up and saw Max. And it was at that moment that I realized something was about to go wrong. She widened her eyes and let out an exaggerated sigh, as if she had just found a diamond on the ground. Without even hesitating, she marched towards us, already holding out her hands to Max as if he were a toy on display in a store window. Max, innocent and unaware that he was about to be the center of a bizarre situation, just wagged his tail, happy with the attention. But I already had a bad feeling about it. The woman bent down and started petting him without even asking permission, which was strange enough, but the worst came soon after.
He liked me better than you.
The sentence was accompanied by a curious look, as if she was analyzing the situation and coming to an absurd conclusion. Okay, people like dogs. Some even exaggerate a little in their excitement. But this woman had a glint in her eye that made me uncomfortable. It was as if she was evaluating a product before buying it. She came closer and asked me where I got it, without taking her eyes off Max. The question took me by surprise. What do you mean, got? The dog was mine. I hadn't picked him up anywhere. I adopted it when it was a puppy. She frowned, as if she wasn't satisfied with the answer. Then she looked at Max again, put her hand on his head, and let out the sentence that made me realize I was dealing with someone completely out of touch with reality.
Have you thought about giving him to someone who can take better care of him?
There you go. The level of madness was already rising. And the worst part? She hadn't finished yet. Her question was still echoing in my head when I realized that this wasn't just exaggerated excitement. She really thought I was going to hand over my dog like a shopping bag. Max, oblivious to everything, kept wagging his tail, thinking he'd just gained a new best friend. I, on the other hand, was already planning the best way to get out of there without a scandal. The woman was still down, stroking his head, as if she had already mentally adopted the dog. And it was at that moment that I realized an important detail. She wasn't just playing with Max. She was holding his collar. Not tightly, but enough to make me uncomfortable. She looked at me with a satisfied smile, as if she had just made a big decision. Then she stood up and said, with frightening confidence,
I think he'd rather stay with me.
She wasn't just someone who was exaggeratedly in love with dogs. This was a person who, on some bizarre level, had just replaced me in my own pet's life. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. I stepped forward and took the leash back, as calmly as possible. She frowned, as if I was doing her a great injustice. Her eyes went from cute animal lover to I might as well sue you for this. The square around us seemed to continue as normal, with children playing and people walking, but inside that little bubble where we were, the tension was rising by the second. She crossed her arms and shook her head, disapproving of my attitude, as if I were a child who had just refused to share a toy. Max, noticing the change in tone, finally stopped wagging his tail and looked at me as if to ask, "What's going on here?" The woman let out a dramatic sigh and muttered to herself something like, "Some people really don't know what's best for animals," before putting her hands on her waist and looking me up and down. I knew it wasn't over, and, unfortunately, I was right. If I thought that woman was just going to accept that Max wasn't hers, I was completely wrong. She was still standing there, staring at me as if I were the villain of the story. The way she crossed her arms and pressed her lips together made it clear that her mind was working at full speed. Perhaps she was trying to decide which ridiculous argument to use next. I prepared for everything, or at least I thought I was prepared, because what came next was far beyond what I expected. She looked at Max, then at me, and let out an exaggerated sigh, the kind someone makes before releasing a big revelation. The woman put her hands on her waist, took a deep breath as if she was about to teach me a moral lesson, and dropped the bombshell.
I think it's been stolen. You should give him to me so I can look after him.
The audacity, the nerve. I blinked, trying to figure out if it was real or if I had unknowingly fallen for a social experiment. Had she really just implied that my dog, which I had adopted as a puppy, wasn't mine? The woman looked around, as if looking for witnesses to support her absurd accusation. Some people were already starting to pay attention to the situation, especially as her voice was now a little louder, as if she was trying to convince the public that I was a criminal. Max, poor guy, was still sitting there, just watching, with no idea that his shared custody was being discussed by a complete stranger. I've seen a lot of people try to get things by insisting, but that was a new level of desperation. The question now was, how was she going to react when she realized that I wasn't willing to fall for it? If I thought that woman had reached the height of absurdity, I was wrong. There was still room for more madness. Max was still sitting next to me, completely oblivious to the fact that his guard was being fought over like a championship trophy. As for the woman, well, she seemed convinced that she had a solid case. She stepped forward and pointed at Max, as if identifying a lost object. Her face was serious, as if she was about to take heroic action.
If you don't want to hand it over, I'll sort it out myself.
And that's when it happened. She simply grabbed Max's collar and pulled, trying to lead him away. Just like that, like she was just picking up a forgotten shopping cart in the middle of the parking lot. And what happened next was simply beautiful. Max, who until then had been calm, finally realized that something was wrong, and as any intelligent dog would do, he planted his paws on the ground and refused to move. The woman tugged on his collar. Max wouldn't move. She tried again, now with more force. Max responded with a look of pure contempt and a body weight worthy of a marble statue. The scene was so ridiculous that some people in the square were already starting to laugh. A woman from afar pointed and whispered something to a friend, who immediately took out his cell phone to record it. I, on the other hand, just crossed my arms and watched, because, honestly, this was no longer a discussion. It was a spectacle. The woman started to get frustrated. She huffed and puffed and, with her dignity down the drain, tried her last card. She let go of the collar, put her hands on her head, and shouted,
Someone call the police! He's stealing a dog!
That was it. Now I was a dog thief. My own dog. But you know what's funny? When you shout something absurd in public, people don't react the way they do in the movies. Nobody ran to arrest me. Not a soul stood up to help the poor victim. On the contrary, a gentleman sitting on a nearby bench took off his glasses, looked at her and asked, with the calm of someone who has seen everything in life, "Ma'am, that dog clearly doesn't want to go with you. Do you really want to insist on that?" And there, in the middle of the square, with people laughing, cell phones recording, and Max looking at her with canine contempt, I realized that the circus was about to close its curtains, but the icing on the cake was yet to come. If there's one thing clueless people can't stand, it's being contradicted in public, and that woman was about to learn that the hard way. After the fiasco of trying to drag Max away as if he were a fairground prize, she stood there, taking a deep breath, trying to process the fact that her genius plan wasn't working. The problem was that now she wasn't just arguing with me. The whole square was already paying attention to the scene. Some people were whispering, others were holding in their laughter, and at least 2 cell phones were recording everything. The gentleman who had made the comment about Max was still standing there, with a little smile on his face, clearly enjoying himself. The woman looked around, as if looking for an ally, someone who would validate her madness and agree that I, a mere commoner, was unfairly keeping the dog that, according to her, clearly chose her. But nobody said anything. No one was on her side. And then came the collapse. She turned abruptly to me, her eyes boiling with indignation, pointed a trembling finger and said something about how some people don't know how to recognize when they're wrong. Then she threw her hair back and walked away, as if she had decided that we were unworthy of her presence. The point is that she tried to leave with dignity. But Max, my dear dog, seemed to have a sixth sense for absurdities like this. It turned out that, before we went to the square, Max had found a puddle of mud. The result? A shower of splashes flew straight onto her legs, hitting her spotless white pants. The woman stopped instantly. She looked down, saw the brown stains, and widened her eyes as if she had just witnessed a heinous crime. I didn't need to say anything. The universe had already taken care of her answer. With an expression of pure hatred and a sound that was a mixture of a grunt and a sigh of defeat, she clenched her fists and walked on without looking back. I stood there for a few seconds, digesting what had just happened. Then I looked at Max, who was now sitting up, staring at me with that innocent look of a dog that has no idea it has just ruined someone's day. I patted him on the head and let out a laugh. "Well done, champ," and we went on our way, knowing that that woman would never dare try to adopt a dog by force again. Have you ever experienced something like this? Tell us in the comments. If you liked this story, subscribe to the channel and like it for more unbelievable stories like this one. Want to see more? Click on the card and enjoy. See you in the next video.